At my mom's birthday, I got a call from my daughter. She said, "Call 911." The words sliced through the chatter and laughter around the dinner table like a knife, and my stomach dropped so hard I could barely breathe. I remember holding the phone so tightly that my knuckles went white while my mom's friends clinked their glasses in the background, oblivious to the fact that in that very second my entire world had shifted. My daughter's voice was trembling, urgent, almost a whisper, and I knew something was terribly wrong, something that couldn't wait another moment. 5 minutes later, I was already running toward my car, heels in my hand, dress catching in. The wind, knowing I would never forget what she told me that night. We had gathered at a cozy Italian restaurant that my mom adored, with warm fairy lights strung overhead and waiters weaving between tables with trays of pasta and wine. It was supposed to be a simple family evening, one of those rare nights when my mom felt celebrated and loved. My sister was in charge of the cake, my dad was taking endless photos, and I was sitting there quietly, enjoying for once that there were no raised voices, no accusations, no undercurrents of family tension. It felt almost too perfect, and in hindsight, it was the last moment of peace before everything spiraled. The ringing of my phone didn't even register as unusual at first. I excused myself, stepping outside into the crisp evening air, and pressed it to my ear. That's when I heard my daughter, her voice breaking, her words barely coherent. "Mom, it's happening again. Please call 911. My daughter, Sophie, had been struggling for months with the way my ex-husband behaved during his weekends. With her. He was supposed to be the fun parent, the one with the bigger house, the louder car, the friends who always seemed to have an endless supply of alcohol around. At first, I told myself she was exaggerating, that maybe she was just uncomfortable because the divorce had been messy, but deep down I knew. I knew because I had lived through it. I had endured his charm that rotted into cruelty, his smirk that preceded every manipulation, and the way he always pushed boundaries just to prove he could. Sophie had started calling me at odd hours, whispering that she didn't feel safe, that he was yelling again, that there were strangers in the house she didn't recognize. And every time, he found a way to twist the story, making me seem overprotective, paranoid, even unstable. But that night was different. Her voice wasn't just scared, it was terrified. There was noise behind her, crashing sounds, a man's angry shouts, and then her panicked plea, "Call 911. I froze for half a second, then snapped into action. I asked her to hide, to lock the door if she could, and told her not to make a sound until the police arrived. My hands were shaking as I dialed, my voice surprisingly steady as I gave them the address I had repeated to myself 1,000 times. And all the while, I could hear her muffled breaths on the line, the weight of her silence pressing into my chest. When the police finally picked up, I explained everything as quickly as I could: who she was, where she was, and what I feared was happening. The operator's calm voice contrasted sharply with the storm inside me, but I clung to it, knowing that this time, at least, someone else would finally witness what I had been trying to prove for years. As I hung up, I thought about the birthday candles waiting to be lit inside, my mom's smile, the music, the laughter, all frozen in time while my daughter's world cracked wide open. By the time I reached my car, my sister had followed me. Outside, her eyes wide with confusion. I didn't have time to explain, didn't have words big enough to contain the urgency, so I just said, "It's Sophie, he did it again. I called the police." And then I drove faster than I ever had in my life, every second stretching unbearably long, every red light a personal enemy, my heart pounding with only one thought: please let me get there before it's too late. When I pulled into his driveway, 2 squad cars were already parked outside, their red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in flickers of chaos. My stomach turned as I saw officers moving quickly toward the door, one hand already on his radio, the other gripping a flashlight. I wanted to jump out and run straight to Sophie, but I forced myself to stay back, to let them handle it because barging in would only make it worse. From where I sat, I could hear shouting inside, muffled but sharp, and then suddenly the slam of a door so hard it rattled the windows. My hands gripped the steering wheel as if it could anchor me in that moment, but every nerve in my body screamed to break free, to pull her out myself. The minutes dragged like hours. I watched as the officers disappeared inside, heard commands barked, short, clipped words like, "Sit down," and "Stay where you are." And then silence, the kind that made me wonder if Sophie was even breathing. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel, whispering prayers I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. Finally, one of the officers emerged with Sophie clutched to his side. She was shaking, eyes wide, clutching her little backpack like it was a lifeline. The sight of her broke me open in a way I can't describe. Relief and rage and sorrow all crashing together. I threw open the car door and ran toward her, not caring that the officer tried to slow me down. Sophie lunged into my arms, burying her face into my shoulder, her small frame trembling uncontrollably. I stroked her hair, whispering, "You're safe now, baby. You're safe." But behind us, as they led my ex out in handcuffs, he still had that damned smirk on his face, like he was untouchable, like he was already calculating how to twist this in his favor. That smirk made my blood run cold, because I knew then that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Back at my mom's, the birthday party was still going on when we walked in, though the energy had shifted. People could see it in my face, in Sophie's tear-stained cheeks, in the way I held her like I would never let go again. My mom looked at me with questions in her eyes, but I just shook my head. The night that began with candles and laughter had turned into a nightmare. And deep down, I realized something. This was the moment everything would change. For years, I had played defense, reacting to his chaos, trying to prove myself, trying to keep Sophie safe one incident at a time. But now, with my daughter's terrified voice still echoing in my head, I knew I had to stop waiting for the next emergency. It was time to take control, to make sure he could never put her in danger again. The days after that night blurred together, a mess of phone calls, police reports, and court dates being scheduled. Sophie clung to me constantly, even when she slept, her small hand gripping my shirt like she was afraid I'd disappear. Every time she closed her eyes, she jolted awake at the sound of a door or a raised voice, and I could see the fear carved into her little body. I tried to keep her world gentle, to keep the house quiet, but the weight of what had happened pressed down on both of us. My ex, on the other hand, wasted no time in spinning his version of events. He told anyone who would listen that I had overreacted, that Sophie was dramatic like her mother, that the police were called because I had poisoned her mind against him. And because he always wore that practice charm, some people believed him. That was when I realized it wasn't enough to wait for justice. I had to build it myself. I started gathering everything. Every late-night call Sophie had made, every text where he refused to return her on time, every message he'd sent taunting me about how much fun she had at his place. I printed them, dated them, stacked them neatly in binders that I brought to my lawyer. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to him. I was documenting him. My lawyer told me to stay calm, to let the evidence speak, but inside I was seething. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just worked quietly, meticulously, like I was building a case brick by brick. Meanwhile, Sophie slowly began to trust that I would always show up for her, that when she whispered, "Mom, I don't feel safe," I would take her seriously. Then came the custody hearing. I'll never forget the way he walked in, confident, smirking, wearing his best suit as though he were about to charm the judge into handing him a medal. He spoke with rehearsed indignation about how I was manipulating our daughter, how I was creating false emergencies, and how he was the stable parent. I sat there silently, letting him bury himself in his lies, while my lawyer opened. The binder and slid page after page of evidence across the table: phone records, police reports, screenshots, dates, times. It wasn't my word against his anymore. It was Sophie's lived truth staring back at him in black and white. And for the first time, I watched that smirk falter. Just slightly, but enough to tell me he knew the tide was turning. The judge listened carefully as my lawyer presented everything. He flipped through the pages, eyes narrowing, while my ex shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For years, he had gotten away with twisting narratives, making himself the victim, but here, under oath, with every record laid bare, his tricks began to crumble. Sophie's voice messages were played aloud, her small, frightened words asking me to come get her, asking me to call 911. The courtroom went so still that I could hear the scratch of someone's pen in the back row. My ex's jaw clenched, but he couldn't smirk now. Not when his daughter's fear was echoing through the room. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my voice steady. I didn't attack him, didn't let emotion cloud my words. I simply told the truth, that I had spent years protecting Sophie quietly, that I had endured the whispers and doubts when he painted me as unstable, that all I wanted was for my daughter to sleep without fear. I reminded them that Sophie had called me that night, not out of manipulation, but out of genuine terror. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just let the facts speak for me. The judge leaned back in his chair, tapped his pen against the desk, and then said words that changed everything. Given the evidence, custody will be modified. Effective immediately, primary custody is awarded to the mother. Visitation for the father will be suspended, pending further review. My breath caught, and for a moment, I thought I had misheard him. But when my lawyer squeezed my arm, I knew. It was real. Sophie was safe. Finally, undeniably safe. I glanced at my ex. His face was pale, the smirk gone completely, his eyes darting as though he were searching for an escape that didn't exist. The man who had built his whole persona on control, on power, on making us afraid, was suddenly stripped of it all in a single sentence. And in that moment, I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel guilt. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. He exploded after the ruling, not in the courtroom where he still pretended to be composed, but in the days that followed. He sent messages, long rants about how I had ruined his life, about how Sophie would grow up to hate me, about how I had embarrassed him in front of everyone. I didn't answer. I archived every single word, forwarded them straight to my lawyer, and blocked his number on Sophie's phone. For the first time in years, I wasn't scrambling to defend myself. I wasn't begging anyone to believe me. I had proof, and now the law was on my side. Sophie began to relax too. At night, instead of jolting awake at every creak in the house, she slept with her favorite blanket and the quiet knowledge that she wouldn't have to go back there anytime soon. She started to smile more, to laugh without glancing over her shoulder, and I realized how heavy the fear had been pressing down on her small shoulders. My family saw the change too. My mom told me that Sophie's eyes looked brighter, that she finally looked like a child again. I let those words sink in, because they reminded me that this fight had never been about me or my ex. It was always about her, about giving her the safety and peace she deserved. When the official paperwork arrived, stamped and signed, I tucked it neatly into the binder with the rest of the evidence. But unlike those other pages, this one wasn't a reminder of pain. It was a shield, proof that we had won, that my daughter had a mother who refused to be silent. And as I set it on the shelf, I felt a quiet vow forming inside me. Never again would I let him, or anyone, put her in that position. This time, the smirk didn't return. This time, he was the one left powerless, and we were the ones who finally walked free. In the weeks that followed, he tried to rally sympathy from his family and friends, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife. He posted cryptic messages online about fathers' rights, about parental alienation, about women who destroy families, hoping someone would believe his side of the story. But this time, it didn't work. People had seen too much. The police, reports, and the court ruling spoke louder than his rehearsed charm, and slowly the support he counted on began to disappear. Sophie and I built new routines: Saturday mornings at the park, late-night movie marathons, long talks where she began to open up about everything she had kept bottled inside. She told me about the strangers he brought around, about the nights she hid in her room, about the fear she carried every time she heard his voice raised. Each word was like a knife in my chest, but I let her speak. I let her unburden herself. And I told her over and over that she was safe now, that none of it was her fault. My mom stood by us, stronger than ever, her birthday long forgotten in the wake of what had happened. But she told me quietly one night, "That call saved Sophie's life." I knew she was right. And in those quiet evenings, when Sophie was finally asleep and I sat alone with my thoughts, I let myself feel the truth. I hadn't just survived him. I had beaten him at his own game, with facts, with patience, with the strength he never expected me to have. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was looking forward. Then came the financial aftermath, the part he thought he could still control. He had always dangled money like a weapon, paying late, withholding support, or making me beg for what was legally owed. But now, with the custody, ruling and documented harassment, my lawyer filed for adjustments, and the court ordered garnishment of his wages. The look on his face when he realized his paycheck would be cut before it ever reached him was almost satisfying. He stormed out of the courthouse that day without looking back, but I didn't need him to. I had already won. Sophie didn't care about the legalities. She just cared that our fridge was full, that I wasn't stressed about bills, that we could buy her art supplies without me calculating every dollar. It was like lifting a shadow that had hung over both of us for too long. He tried to retaliate by filing appeals, sending letters through his lawyer, but each attempt was weaker than the last, dismissed for lack of merit. The smirk that once felt permanent on his face had been replaced by silence, and I learned something important. Silence from a man like him is proof of defeat. Sophie began to thrive at school, teachers telling me she seemed more confident, more engaged, like a weight had been taken off her shoulders. At night, when she showed me her drawings, bright, colorful, full of hope, I realized she was healing, faster than I ever imagined. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we were finally free. Months later, the final confrontation came, not in a courtroom, but in a grocery store aisle. I was pushing a cart with Sophie by my side when I felt the air shift, and there he was, standing a few feet away, older, thinner, with bitterness etched into his face. For a split second, I braced for the smirk, the cutting remark, the power play he always tried to pull. But it never came. He just stared at us, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking from me to Sophie. And in that silence I saw it. The realization that he no longer had control, that the fear he once wielded had vanished. Sophie squeezed my hand, unafraid, and we walked right past him without a word. That moment sealed it for me. The real revenge wasn't in yelling, wasn't in dramatic victories, but in the quiet strength of moving forward, of living well, of showing him that his absence wasn't a wound, but a blessing. We built a new life, in small, steady steps, family dinners without tension, birthdays filled with laughter instead of phone calls that froze the world, mornings where Sophie woke up smiling instead of trembling. And in the back of my mind, I held on to that night, that call on my mom's birthday, the one that changed everything. It had started as panic and fear, but it ended as the turning point that gave us freedom. Looking back now, I realize that night was both the most terrifying and the most liberating moment of my life. My daughter's trembling voice saying, "Call 911" wasn't just a plea for help. It was the beginning of our escape, the crack in the walls he had built around us. For years, I had carried his smirk like a curse, hearing it in every courtroom. Lie, every dismissive text, every whisper he spread to make me look unstable. But in the end, that smirk was nothing more than a mask, and when the truth came out, it slipped away faster than he could catch it. Sophie and I built something stronger than his games could ever touch. We found safety in small routines, joy, in little moments, and a sense of power in knowing we had survived him without becoming like him. My mom often tells me she wishes her birthday hadn't been shadowed by that chaos, but I always tell her the same thing. Mom, that was the night. Everything changed. That was the night Sophie found her voice, and I finally found mine. I don't pretend life is perfect now. There are scars, and there are nights when Sophie still wakes up from bad dreams, when I still flinch at the sound of unexpected footsteps. But there is also freedom, laughter, and a quiet kind of peace that I never thought we'd have. He is no longer the center of our story. We are. My revenge wasn't in destroying him. It was in refusing to let him destroy us. And every time, Sophie comes running to me with a smile instead of fear. Every time I hear her laugh instead of cry, I know I made the right choice that night. Family isn't who you're tied to by law or blood. It's who fights for you, who believes you, who protects you when no one else will. That's the family I've built with my daughter, brick by brick, stronger than anything he could ever take away. So if you're asking whether I regret it, whether I went too far, I'll tell you the truth. I didn't go far enough. Because for the first time in years, he's the one looking over his shoulder, and I'm the one walking forward with my head held high. Tell me, did I do the right thing, or would you have gone further? Friends, this story was entirely created by me. It is purely fictional, born from my imagination, and has no connection to real people or real events. This is an original storyline crafted exclusively for our channel to bring you strong emotions, tension, and a powerful ending. If you enjoyed this story, please support the channel. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next premieres. Share your thoughts in the comments. I always read them, and your feedback helps me create even more engaging stories.